You're watching Outsourced, America's manufacturing crisis, built by Grip 6.
10 years ago, how many of you knew what the hell the supply chain was? No, I'm serious.
You know, everybody made fun of Joe Biden for that, but I remember the beginning of COVID when 15 days to slow the spread was initially proposed. I remember this. Fauci and Trump up there, hey, just 15 days. And I remember sitting there screaming at everybody, do you understand how supply chains work? And everybody told me to shut up, that I wanted grandma to die and that we could just pick up the remote control and just unpause the economy after we pause it. I remember this like it was yesterday. So maybe Joe Biden accidentally stumbled into something legitimate. Maybe people really do not understand how supply chains work. So let's bring in the expert, my buddy Ross Kennedy, Fortis analysis and also a supply chain expert and national security expert. Ross, okay, this is going to be the ultimate dumb down for a guy like you, but pretend like I've been educated in America's education system. I therefore know nothing about supply chains in the business world. What's a supply chain?
Well, I mean, essentially, it's just all the different things and partners that come together to make another thing. If you're talking about Legos, you know, the people that would be making the plastic material that the Legos are formed from, the people that are making the machines that actually mold the Legos. You know, if a physical thing is being made and transported, or in some cases the software and design elements of a complex thing, that all constitutes a supply chain. So it's just how a thing gets made and moves to another place to be eventually consumed, whether it's by a business or by a consumer.
Ross, how does this work when we bring in other countries? And this is the part of it that gets so convoluted, even in my mind, and I understand supply chains because, okay, I've got to make my Legos, but in order to make the plastic or whatever it is to make the Legos, I need this special ingredient from Nepal, but I also need another ingredient from the Philippines. But wait, the government just changed its policies. There's an extra tax on what it's from. You see what I mean? It gets so confusing when you make it international, does it not?
Yeah, it does. It's we went international. Globalism became the dominant way. It became the default mode for the Harvard MBAs of the world in the 80s and 90s, because at the end of the day, it was all about getting to the lowest cost per unit. Now, whatever that widget is that you're making, you want to make it as cheaply as possible, of course, and sell it for as much as you possibly can. And so what you saw happening was that manufacturers and suppliers began to co-locate their manufacturing at the cheapest place they could purchase and then combine and assemble all of the goods. Usually the limiting factor was going to be energy costs, labor costs, or regulations. So in the US, as we began to implement more expansive regulatory reform related to the Clean Water Act, clean air, as our energy got more expensive, as it became more difficult and expensive to hire people to make chemicals, whatever it may be, places like China stepped up to fill the gap because they were very cheap for labor. They obviously didn't care much about the environment. And then what built up around that was a transportation method, or transportation supply chain element, which was how do we get the things we're making over there to here? And then you begin to see the ocean carriers begin to drive their own costs down, and the rise of containerization made it so that things could be made and transported to and made in one place, and then the finished product transported here to be consumed. So at the end of the day, generally the more expensive or difficult it is to make a thing, the less likely a given government is going to be, supporting the manufacturing of those things.
Globalism when it comes to an economy. Is it bad? Is it all bad? Or is some of it good? What's the Ross analysis?
The more you can control the things that you desperately need, the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, if you will, food, water, energy, shelter, clothing, the better off you are. Globalism gets, I guess, more useful if you're looking at luxury goods, or if you're talking about things that are nice to haves, not need to haves. But in the case of the United States, so many things that we desperately need that would be a leash or handcuffs on us, or a way to control us if those things were to go missing or were to be cut off. We are far too dependent on global sources for that. So it's not even that they're made in a neighboring country that's friendly. A lot of these things are being made in distant countries that rely on very fragile modes of transportation that can get very expensive in a hurry. And they're being made in countries like China and Russia that are adversarial to U.S. interests. So in that case, globalism extremely bad. And before we even tackle the question of to what extent is globalism good, we should probably at least be able to take care of ourselves and then worry about the bigger picture.
You mentioned China a couple minutes ago when we were talking about things being made there and how much cheaper labor is. I'm scared to even ask the question, but Ross, how much does slave labor come into play when we deal with the things that we buy in this country?
Far more than we'd like to admit to ourselves, if nothing else. It's not just in Xinjiang involving the Uyghurs, though, of course, that's the issue that's gotten a lot of shine in the last few years. But if you look at China's dominance in the rare earth metals industry, if you look at their dominance in various forms of high-end manufacturing even, if you look at their dominance in textiles, if you take all of these things together, the one common link is that many of the large production centers for them come from areas, or the supply chains for those industries begin in some of the far-flung distant provinces of China, where they do absolutely utilize forced labor. But it's not just in those provinces where manufacturing is a problem. It's the coal that gets dug out of the ground all over the country to power their various factories, endemic with prison labor, forced labor. The other one, anytime you see poverty alleviation programs, where a company or a Chinese province says, oh, we participate in poverty alleviation, that's code for internal migrant trafficking. And what they're doing is they're taking very poor people and conscripting them into incredibly low-paid slave-like conditions, moving them from one province to another and forcing them to make things, in some factory that's 1,000 miles from their home and families.
Is this something we need to be more proactive about as a nation, Ross, in all seriousness? I'm not even picking political parties here. Or is this just kind of how it is? The second you start taking things from other countries, you're going to have slave labor as part of your economy.
Sure it is. And it's not just China. It's in the Congo. Very famously, they utilize artisanal mining as a way, if you will, but which just essentially means a mom with a baby on her back and a pickaxe, smacking at the rock. These types of things are all over the world. It is that way, but it doesn't have to be that way. There are a lot of ways that we can decouple ourselves from these types of situations, and we can get more aggressive about pursuing human rights and the bottom line. There doesn't have to be a tension between them. In the U.S., we've utilized UFLPA, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and recent discussion I was having with some high-level Customs and Border Protection officials who is one of the regulating agencies in enforcing that act. There's 78,000 companies right now under active investigation, either Chinese entities or U.S. entities that are suspected of being involved and are having shipments detained and investigated under UFLPA. So we're not doing nothing about it. It's certainly the most aggressive that we've ever been in trying to enforce this, but there's a huge amount of work to be done, and we're not seeing the amount of reshoring activity yet that one might suspect they would be if they're importing from China and getting their shipments detained for suspension of the act. They're kind of just waiting it out or setting up new companies and trying to bypass or get the goods in through Canada or Mexico or some other way.
Ross, thank you, my brother. Come back soon.
Thank you, Jesse.
I talk to you a lot about Grip 6. And what do I do? What do? I pull out the wallets because everyone loves the wallets. These cool little card holders. And yeah, my cards lock in. You've seen it 100 times. I'm not even going to do it. I've talked to you about the belts. I've talked to you about the socks. I've talked to you about the quality of everything. That's not really what appeals the most to me about it. I love that it's all American made. American made. American made. And I'll tell you, to my shame, I never used to place a big priority in that when I was younger. In fact, when I'd have an old timer say, buy American, sometimes I'd roll my eyes. Okay, buddy, if I'm going to go with what's cheaper. And those days are past. We need to make American made, the American worker, American quality, the lack of American slave labor a priority. I love that about Grip 6. I do. To be honest with you, full disclosure, I would probably buy their socks if they weren't even that great because they're made in America. Now, they happen to be the best freaking socks ever, the best belt ever. You already know about the wallet, but I love that. Praise the boys of Grip 6 for that, for sure. And I love that they have new stuff coming too. By the way, if you want a wallet, and you should, or socks or a belt, whatever they make, made in America, that's putting your money where your morals are, go to grip6.com/Jesse, all right? They give you a special discount out there. grip6.com/Jesse. We'll be back.
You're watching Outsourced, America's manufacturing crisis, built by Grip 6.